Okay, let's talk about the lathe object. Now, the lathe object rotates a spline around the y-axis of the local axis system of the generator object to generate a surface of revolution. You can create a wine glass from a simple profile. The lathed object appears as soon as you drop the spline into the lathe object in the object manager. Usually the profile spline should lie on the XY plane because it will be rotated around the y-axis. So let's take a look at what that might mean. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to middle mouse click to get out of the perspective view, and I'm going to work in the front view. And I have a picture of a wine glass I'm just going to drag into the front view. So I'm going to hit Shift V, and I'm going to come over here, middle mouse click, and just sort of get this lined up. It's pretty much lined up exactly in the middle, and I think that's going to work fine. I'm going to adjust the transparency so it doesn't get in my way so much. Next, I'm going to come up here and grab my Bezier drawing tool. Maybe zoom in here a little bit. And what I want to do is sort of start right here like I'm drawing from the inside of the glass and sort of go up around here to about there. Then I want to come back down on the outside of the glass. And I'm going to come down here down the stem and maybe come out here and then sort of in here. All right, so let's go ahead and try and make that work. Don't worry if you don't get it right the first time. It's not that big a deal. So I'm going to place a point there, and then I'm going to place a point here and sort of drag up. And then I'll place another point here, sort of come up here. And you can move these points around later, so don't worry about it. I'll come down here, do that one again. And we'll do this again. We come over here. And this is kind of ugly, but you can still do it. I'm going to come down here. Sort of straighten that up. Come down the spline, or come down the stem, I should say. And maybe do something like this. I'm going to come out there. And then maybe come back in here. Okay. So that's my basic spline that I've drawn. Hideous. So let's go in here and sort of fix it up a little bit. So I'm going to go in here and I want to be able to move some of these points around. So I'm going to select my points. And I'm just going to sort of play around with these and try and get them working right. So I'm going to turn that to soft interpolation. I can kind of move this around. And move that in a little bit. Down here, maybe move that one in a little bit. Just kind of play around with these until you get it the way you want it. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. You want to select some of these and change the interpolation method if you don't feel like you're getting what you need. I'm going to change this one as well. I'm going to grab the move tool, sort of play around with this. Want it to be a little thicker there. Going down here, move this one in. Continue down. And continue down even further. Something like this. You could also do this in a program like Illustrator and then import your spline if you felt more comfortable. And we will talk about how to do that in another movie. For here, we're going to just go with the tools that are given to us here in Cinema 4D. So I'm going to say that that's going to work okay. And I'll show you how we can actually manipulate these a little further once we get this done. But let's go ahead and go into our perspective view. Let's just move this out a little bit because that's bugging me. Maybe a little bit like that. And maybe even come over here and put another point right there, holding down Command or Control, and then sort of moving that out a little bit. I think that's going to look a little bit better. I know I said I'm going to stop doing this, but it's driving me kind of crazy. So let me grab these, make sure that these are soft. Let's go in here and take a look at what we have. So this is our profile spline. Now, a couple things we need to make sure that we have is that we need this point and this point to both be at 0. So let's select each one of these. And we can see that on the X, it's sitting at 2.09 centimeters. Let's go ahead and turn that to 0 and hit enter. Now let's go ahead and select this one, and it's at 0.881 centimeters. Let's change that to 0 as well. So now we know that both of these are sitting on the 0 on the y-axis. And since it's going to be spun around the y-axis, we want this to be 0 and 0, otherwise we're going to have a hole here. So let's go ahead and grab our lathe object and put the spline under the lathe object. And wham. You can see we have something that looks similar to a wine glass. Now, we are definitely having some issues with our intermediate points, and we'll go into those in a later exercise as well. But you can kind of see how this thing works. So we basically create the spline, we drop it underneath the lathe, and the lathe spins it around the y-axis to create the geometry. Come over here to display and go to lines. We can sort of see what that looks like there. Now, if we go back to point mode and we turn off our lathe for a second, we can still come in here and adjust our spline points. So what I was talking about earlier, if we don't have this setting at 0, let's just turn this back on, and we know that that particular point is selected. We look at this from inside the glass, and if this thing was setting at anything other than 0, then you see we would have this hole here, right? So if we turn that back to 0, we don't have that issue. So that's sort of a down and dirty example of how to use the lathe object here in Cinema 4D.